Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Comics Lair. We're sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. This discussion will include information about the Batman movie and other Batman movies, TV shows, and media. So if there's anything you want to see and you don't want to risk it being spoiled, you might go and watch it and then come back and watch this panel, which will focus on the darkness and the light in Batman's character. So I'd like to start by asking the panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about how they first became interested in Batman. John, will you start?
Hey, I'm John L. French, retired crime scene investigator from Baltimore City Police Department, now a writer. I've been interested in Batman for, it's been decades. My first exposure to Batman was in a World's Finest comic in which Superman arranges for Batman to have superpowers 24 hours, and I forget exactly why. I've been reading Batman on and off. Batman The Dark Knight was the reason I got back into comics. And in I think issues 114 and 115 of the original Legends of the Dark Knight, I make an appearance as a crime scene person for the Gotham PD working under Captain James Gordon.
Cool. Stephen?
Hey, I'm Stephen Van Patten. And I'd say my first tie-in or my first draw was the old Adam West series that kind of caught me there as a little kid and all that. Fast forward, I'm standing in Forbidden Planet. Anybody from New York who knows that particular scene. Yeah, I'm in Forbidden Planet, spending my allowance, and then later on, it goes from allowance to college work study to ad nauseum, everything from Long Halloween to Dark Knight and all that, of course. And of course, like a lot of other people, I'm just following along with the movies and the animation, which the animations are actually really, really good. That's kind of it.
Fraser?
I'm Fraser Sherman. My first encounter with Batman was my first comic, which was Justice League of America 30. Then I remember picking up a couple of annuals as a kid. I don't think I really got keen on Batman until really a fan until the middle of the 70s. But I now have, thanks to DC's reprint department, all the Batman from his debut into the early 50s. So I'm a lot more of a fan now.
Kyoko?
Hi, I'm Kyoko M. My first exposure to Batman was at the tender age of what I'm going to guess is somewhere between 6 and maybe 8 years old. And I don't have a lot of early childhood memories, but I distinctly remember that my parents rented Batman Mask of the Phantasm when I was a little kid. And even though I was so small, I just remember watching the scene when he's at the graveyard begging his parents for it to be okay that he's in love. And I was 7. I don't understand all these complex emotions and stories and things, but it left such an impression on me that I remember it from being that young, of just the pain that he was going through and just seeing how much he wanted to be okay and be happy, but do the right thing at the same time. So as soon as I grew up, I was just absorbing every Batman related thing that I could find. I think probably the first time I would have gotten to see a film probably would have been Batman Forever, which is fine that it's goofy and ridiculous and not terribly faithful, but for a kid, again, I was still a little too young to have watched the Keaton Batmans yet. I probably watched those when I was in my early teens, something to that effect. But that also left an impression on me of that was my first exposure of the character in a real life context, and I ended up really being fascinated. So after that point, my parents were just allowing me to go out and read comics and grab different Batman related things. I have a Batman tattoo on my shoulder here, as a matter of fact. But a lot of my love pretty much stemmed from Batman the Animated Series. And then I started picking up comics and watching TV shows and pretty much anything related to the character, at least in the core character that I identify with, is what I ended up getting into.
Okay. Yamil?
Hi, I'm Yamil. Same Batman Animated Series was my introduction to Batman. The Mask of the Phantasm as well. And when I first watched it, it was, right when it had come out, and I didn't even speak English. I grew up in Puerto Rico, but it still like resonated with me so much so when I got here, I was like, so who was that one character? They popped up for like one movie and never saw them again. Like, I was just dumbfounded by it and amazed.
Well, those of you who've watched other Comics Lair panels know I've been reading comics in general since I was 8 or 9 years old. And I think my first exposure to Batman was in an issue of Justice League, which I bought because of Superman. But the first Batman story I really, really remember was in one of those wonderful bargain 80-page giants for a quarter. And they reprinted Golden Age stories. And I really liked Robin better than Batman. In fact, Robin was my first, as the saying goes, book boyfriend. I read the Batman comic books for Robin. And so the first story I really remember was, I think it's a Golden Age story, Robin Dies at Dawn.
Oh, good one.
And, I had a crush on Robin. What do you mean Robin dies? That can't happen. And of course, it being a comic book, it all worked out in the end. But that's the first Batman story I really strongly remember. But I also watched the animated series, and I was naive enough that I didn't realize it was camp. I just took it straight on and enjoyed it, and had a crush on Burt Ward too. I'm an equal opportunity Robin crush person. And so then I liked the animated series and the movies, and I have some thoughts about the direction Batman has taken, and I'm sure the rest of you do too. So why don't we kind of dive into that here? Batman was introduced, he was called the Dark Knight when he was introduced initially. But it seems to me, just looking back casually, that the tone for a long time after that grew progressively lighter. And I wonder whether you all agree with that or not. Stephen, will you start?
Sure. I think as the years have gone by, I think he's just kind of adapted with the times. I think a few of the more enduring franchises that we've all watched over the years, I feel like they've sort of adapt to what's going on in real life a little bit. Kind of like, he was campy in the 60s, but then he gets all serious now, and it's very gritty, and everybody talks like this. And I think it's just kind of, it's an escalation, so to speak, or it's a reflection of what we are kind of seeing in our own society, I want to say. Because, I mean, to use another example, like Star Trek, for example, like, they were very like mini skirts and very like, sort of like veiled sexual harassment. But, it's like they got real serious in the 90s. You had Picard, and he was very, very businesslike. You still have Riker kind of being a hoe or whatever, but it's kind of like the same thing. It's like Batman, as Adam West would do it, was very, as a kid you took it very seriously, but then as an adult you're like, oh, okay, but that was the 60s. So no, I think now is he's all serious because we live in a more serious time.
Fraser?
Yes, when he started, he was much darker and grimmer. That's partly because he was a lone operator. He had no one to talk to. Once he had Robin and they got some banter and conversation going, I frankly think in a lot of ways it's more readable because he does have someone to talk to. It also got lighter, and it would progressively get lighter through the decades until late 60s when Frank Robbins and Irv Novick started to get it more darker, more street level, followed by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. unfortunately, since then, nobody's really able to be, and it gets much more acute in this century, nobody's able to think of anything to do with Batman other than make him darker, make it grimmer, the Joker needs to kill more people. And it doesn't work after a certain point, which they passed long ago.
Okay, well, Charles Coletta has joined us. If you will introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about how you first became interested in Batman, then we'll resume and go around.
Thank you, and excuse my tardiness. I'm always telling my students, be on time. I'm Charles Coletta from the Department of Popular Culture at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and I've been teaching there for 23 years, and I have been a Batman fan for about as long as I can remember. I think I started with Batman on the old Super Friends cartoon show in the 1970s as a little kid.
Okay.
And thank you for having me.
Oh, glad you're here. So we'll pick up with, and then I'll come back around to you with the question, Charles. Kyoko, do you agree that Batman was introduced very dark and then, at least for a while, over a period of years, grew lighter in tone?
Yes. What's interesting is I am a big fan of riff tracks, and riff tracks actually riff the 1940s black and white Batman. And if you guys have never seen it, it is the funniest thing you'll ever see, because it has all of the camp from Adam West, but none of the just basic competency in either storytelling or literally budget. So there's just, you have these guys running around in these little flimsy costumes. There's obviously nobody there who was a fight choreographer. So like every time they try to have a fight scene, it's just kind of them awkwardly bumping into each other, that kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting just because it makes me wonder where that came from, because it was before we got to Adam West. So I think in some ways, it does try to carry a serious storyline throughout, but there's so many plot holes and the lack of budget, the laughable fight scenes, stuff like that, ended up making a really enjoyable, corny project. And I don't know if it was received that way at the time. But I think that there's a reason for it. I think they knew that in order to let that character grow, he did need to have some more lightness come into his life. And that started with Robin, just because now you have a set of responsibilities. I have this young ward that I need to take care of, and I have to still protect myself and protect the city. And so I definitely think that it goes in intervals, honestly. It'll kind of go up. So again, we had that 40s period so he started out very dark and then got a little bit lighter between the 40s Batman and the Adam West. And then we went back to Keaton and it went more serious. And then it went back to light with Val Kilmer and George Clooney. And then it went back to, it's just always, I feel like it's probably always going to ping pong in a way. We are currently in a space where people like the darker story, more cynical stories. And I do think that's a little bit of a disservice to him, just because you appreciate dark when you have light to compare it to. And so that's my hope for Batman moving forward, is that we're still back in the whole, he needs to be all dark and tormented. But I'm hoping that we move past that back to some of the richer storylines, because I really do think that the Bat family is what took that character from just being a really good character to being a great character.
Yamil?
Well, I wonder, just from a comic book perspective, if it was the comics code when that popped up that drove Batman to be so light after starting off so dark. And then just past that, it would have been, Neil Adams was mentioned earlier, who laid a lot of the framework of what Batman would look like and like a lot of the visuals. And I think past in that area was when comics as a whole was becoming more, Alan Moore was running around, more serious and less aimed at teenage boys. So I feel like it's kind of like Comics Code affected it, and then with it being such a big prestige product or IP at that time in the 80s or whatever range that is, I think that's when everybody was trying to go dark again. Because of it being more, it's easier, it's kind of easier to make dark art than make like something funny and be taken seriously, I find.
Okay. John?
Okay, yes, Batman was dark. I remember when he was going after some criminal who was a vampire. In the finale, he just pulled out his 45 and said, you won't be killing anybody else, and fired a couple shots into the coffin. Batman, the original Batman, carried a gun. And then, like Yamil said, it was probably the the comics code and seduction of the innocent that forced them into having Batman less killing, more capers, where the villains were more interested in committing gimmick crimes rather than killing people. And then that kind of led into the Batman TV show, where they might try to kill people, but I don't really think they killed that. If they killed anybody, it was off screen. And then Batman got a little more serious, but he wasn't as dark as he is today. I mean, Batman realized things were, crime fighting was serious, and the Joker showed up again and started killing people, and the Riddler got a little darker, and but still, Batman had a life away from that. At one point, he was trying to juggle a romance with Selina Kyle and an impending romance between him and Alfred's daughter, which is a little creepy when you think about him regarding Alfred as his father. But, and then somewhere along the line, somebody in DC, Batman cannot be happy. And that's what led to this whole thing where it seems like every year there is a big fight in the Bat family that promises, Batman promises to be more approachable and be more of a father to his adopted sons. And then the following year, it got another one coming up in September after this whole Night Terrors thing is over. But on an aside, in Night Terrors Batman issue 2, Batman does.
I'm sorry,
so
what?
Batman smiles. So at least he found something funny in this. But the lighter side of Batman is I usually find it when he is in somebody else's comic, or he's in the Justice. There's a little bit of repartee in there. Some years ago, Superman was elected chairman of the Justice League, and the Trinity is meeting, and Superman says, well, they're all in their civilian clothes, but Clark says to Bruce, something just occurred to me. As chairman of the Justice League, I can give you orders. And Batman said, I encourage you to try, if only to test the limits of authority. Stuff like that. But lately, there hasn't been a lot of light in Batman's.
Okay, well, we'll talk about some of the ways that may be manifest. Charles, what do you think?
Well, I should just mention that back in 2019, Bowling Green, we had a Batman popular culture conference, and it was very well attended. We had people from literally all over the world come, and so Batman is still incredibly popular. And I am among those who thinks that the character has gone way too dark, and it's way too adult. That I believe that when Robin was introduced back in the 40s, sales doubled. And I think what a lot of people miss today is that these characters are primarily for children. Yes, a lot of adults, we're all adults and we read them, and that's fine. But when you get things like the Joker's face is being ripped off, and there are, the murders, and it's becoming too gross and grim for me. And I think this is not a popular thing to say, but I do really believe now more than ever that Frank Miller did more harm than good. That, Batman maybe did need a kick in the pants and need to be a little bit darker, but it's just this unrelenting grimness. I would be very uncomfortable giving a mainstream Batman comic book to a elementary school age kid today. There's lots of Batman out there, which is fine for kids and adults and wherever. But to me, it's not fun anymore. It's just not fun. It's like someone said, Batman can't be happy. Well, why not? I always think, you're a billionaire. You've got all these toys, and lighten up. Bad things happen to people, Bruce. It makes the character seem much more immature. And I'll just end my little rant with this. A couple of years ago, when the most recent Batman movie came out, I was excited to see it. And now that I really regret that I did. If that's what Batman is now, then he's not for me anymore. Maybe I'll live long enough for him to go back to being a little bit lighter. I hope so.
One thing I did want to jump in and say is I've been very delighted that the fan base has kind of like been our savior in that regard. Like between fan fiction and actual, there are several webcomics that are delightful. They keep all of the mythos and stuff, but then they just come up with like sitcom-esque type of situations that let you see more of his personality and his interactions with the others. That's one thing I think is lovely, that the fandom has kind of picked up the slack from us losing a little bit of that light. But that's my piece. I'm done.
Also, I'll throw in, for light, Batman and Scooby-Doo have been having a team-up magazine. They're up to about 18 issues or so. It is light. It is funny. It's as true to both sides as you can get in that situation. Also, the trade paperbacks of the Batman, the Brave and the Bold spin-off from the cartoon version, those are very light. Those do have a Batman who enjoys one issue, this is amazing. I punch out Nazis and Vikings in the same day. I love being me.
On that thing, the movie Batman and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh,
it is. I mean, somebody gave it to me as a gift, and I went, "Oh, okay, I'll watch it." And it was great. It stuck to the whole. It did justice to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it did justice to Batman. It was a wonderful.
Well, you all have touched on actually several things I wanted to talk about, including how dark is too dark for you personally, and his relationship with the Bat family. And before I go into the next thing of that, though, I will say, Frank Miller, I read the first few pages of All-Star Batman and Robin.
Oh,
and I got to the part where Batman kidnapped Dick Grayson, who had just watched his parents die, drove him away from the circus, and slapped him. And I thought, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I'm not reading the rest of this. That's a bridge too far.
It did give us a great Batman line.
Yeah, to make fun of for the rest of forever. We're never going to drop it, and we shouldn't drop it because I can't believe that got past editing. I mean, really.
Yeah.
But one thing I will credit is one of the internet reviewers I love. His name is Linkara. He created this amazing thing to help us deal with the Frank Miller problem, which is he decided that the guy that was in All-Star Batman was not really Bruce Wayne. It was a crazy hobo dressed up as Bruce Wayne, and he called him Crazy Steve. And so every time I refer to either the Frank Miller Batman or people who are in that camp of like, he always needs to be like a dark and twisted, like lunatic, I just call him Crazy Steve because that's not Batman. So thank you, Linkara.
Well, on a lighter note, let's talk about Dick Grayson. What do you think that Bruce Wayne's adoption of Dick Grayson says about Bruce's character, and how do you think it affects him? Fraser, will you start?
I'll give it a shot. It says, that he's somebody who's caring, grim, and determined that he needs someone in his life. And at some level, he knows that, which is a point they've made in justifying why he keeps getting Robin. He needs someone to care about. He looked at Dick, saw someone whose parents had been murdered, identified with him, took him under his wing, and trained him. And even though he has had other Robins since, that is still one of the big and most important bonds in his life. One of the things that they do so wrong is the implication that Batman was just so grim and cold that he was you read some of the interactions in Batman and Dick in the 21st century, you think they could never have been happy and he should never have had a kid around, and that's not how it should be. It should be fun. A kid who has seen his parents die, who is getting a chance to strike back, who has a purpose in his life and someone who cares about him, and as in Robin Dies at Dawn, will do whatever it takes to care for him, and that's what it should be.
Kyoko?
I think that it's a really good character beat for him, just because it shows that even after all that he's been through, there's still so much love that he has to give the world. And I get really grumpy about this modern campaign to take the hatred we have for real billionaires and transfer it to Batman, because I'm like, look, y'all, yes, I don't like billionaires in real life either, but we're not going to do this. We're not going to sit here and pretend, all he does is beat up criminals. He doesn't do anything else for Gotham. No, wrong. Read a comic. That is not what he does, and that's not the only thing he does. And Dick is part of that argument I have with these people that insist that he's not doing any good. He's just some rich guy that's punching people. He cares about that boy. All of the broken things inside of him, he still thinks that he has something else, someone else's life that he can improve. He can give that boy a purpose and keep him from tipping over into that giant abyss that Bruce fortunately has not fallen into yet. And I think that's really reflective of just what a dynamic person he is, that he's able to, still have or again, not be numb. I mean, so many people can get numb after the trauma that they've been through, PTSD and things like that. But he didn't allow that to sink in and just make him so cold that he couldn't care about other people. And I really think that that's what the strength is. And I think that that's something that Dick needs. I think it's really good that Bruce and Dick found each other, because there's a really good repartee that they have with each other. Dick understands certain parts of Bruce that Bruce won't show to anybody else, and the reverse. And honestly, out of all the Robins, Dick kind of ended up being the most balanced one. It might have been because he was the first one and he met him when he was so little. But if you think about Dick's personality, he's kind of like Bruce, but with like 50% less angst. So he can be very charming. He can be funny. He's a slut. I would be a slut too if I was that hot. But anyway. And so all of these romantic relationships, all these friendships, all these different things that he was able to develop because he had Bruce there to kind of take care of him. And so I think it's a really, really good kind of symbiotic relationship in a way.
Yamil?
So I just see, I recently read about like a lot of the old school pulp characters that Batman kind of pops out from, and a lot of them ended up getting that partner, that like ward tag team sidekick, and it was just to get the readers to resonate to a character that looked like them, right? And I feel like that is something where now where like Dick has grown up and he's his own, he's not a sidekick anymore. Is that the lighter Batman that we're looking for? Because I've read it, Nightwing, I've read it a few times. It's not really like a constant for me, but it always feels lighter, always feels more friendly than the trauma that Batman is constantly under.
Charles, what do you think?
I did a paper a number of years ago now for an academic conference, and I think the real inspiration for Robin, I really do, I don't have any proof of this, but I think the real inspiration for Robin is Junior in the Dick Tracy comics strip. If you read the way that Dick Tracy finds this orphaned boy and sort of brings him in as a ward and raises him, it's very close to what happened about a decade later in the 1940s. And once you read, if you're reading the old Dick Tracys from the 30s, what quickly happens is that Dick Tracy's primary relationship is with Junior. Tess Trueheart, the fiance, kind of fades into the background, but there are a lot of storylines where Junior is going to be taken away by the authorities, or his real mother might show up, and I think that Dick Grayson and Robin was essential for Batman's success. I just mentioned one last thing. I remember my niece and nephew, who are now in high school age, but when they were little kids, they loved Robin. They played Batman and Robin, and they just loved Robin. And there's something about, I think, being that youthful, that kid who's going along on the adventure with Batman, that kids respond to. And I do regret, to a certain extent, that Robin had to grow up, or Dick had to grow up, and they've broken up that relationship. It's for too many years now, and I wish they would bring them back together a little bit, like what was said before.
John?
Okay, I pretty much agree with what everybody says. Bruce Wayne saw in Dick Grayson, himself, the same situation. Parents killed, left an orphan, and he moved in to keep what happened to him from happening to Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson wound up becoming Robin, but he was always, we talk about the lighter side of Batman. Batman is dark. Dick Grayson is the light. Is the light. He's the one who keeps, like I said, somebody said, keeps Batman grounded, and part of the evidence on that is right after the whole Batman R.I.P. Well, during the whole Batman R.I.P. Dick Grayson reluctantly stepped in as Batman, and he made a great Batman. And there was even something, a news thing in the comics where it said where Batman used to avoid the cameras, now it seems like he's seeking them out, and we think we caught him smiling. So he made a much stabler Batman. And now in the Nightwing comics, he is everything, we all wish Batman. And the reason I think they've permitted him to, he moved to Bloodhaven, and he's in a steady relationship with Barbara Gordon. He's got a dog. He's, thanks to Alfred, Dick is a millionaire, probably a billionaire, and he is the Batman we all want to see. But because we can't have that Batman, they gave us Night.
Stephen?
And this may come off base, but I also, speaking to the grounding thing, I always saw them as more or less having sort of this Don Quixote Sancho relationship to some degree, just in the sense that when Batman is really off on one, it's like, oh yeah, tonight I'm going to kill a joke. It's like, no, you're not. Relax, come on. It's like, and they have these dialogues which actually open the door for certain complexities. Certainly open the door for the one thing that I really enjoy outside of the adventure side of things is the dry humor that comes from their back and forth. And you see it also, you see it really in the Justice League cartoon, more so with Batman and Superman, kind of like digging at each other every once in a while. But that, I feel like that originated with Batman and Robin. So,
well, as much as I have issues with some things about Tom King's Batman run, one of my favorite bits of it was the issue after Selina Kyle left Gotham and left Bruce at the altar, and Dick came to stay, and really was there for Bruce. And there were flashbacks to how Bruce was there for Dick when he first came to Wayne Manor. And it really was lovely. Of course, then it led up to Nightwing being shot in the head, which led to all sorts of things that many Nightwing fans would rather not remember, so we won't really go there. But I thought that was a perceptive issue because that gets swept aside. And there's all this debate about the best Robin and who is Bruce the closest to. And as several of you have pointed out, Bruce and Dick are the only two in that family who saw their parents murdered. And that has to create a unique bond, which is not to say that they don't each have wonderful close bonds with the others, but it's not quite like that. And there's it at the end of the Court of Owls story. I don't remember which issue it is. I have actually a couple of the panels on my tablet because every once in a while I like to go back and look at them when things between Bruce and Dick get really dark. And they're talking at the end of it. Bruce is in a wheelchair, all bandaged up. And he says to Dick, yeah, the Court of Owls saw something in you when you were little, but so did I. And it might seem like I saved you by taking you in, but that's not true. The truth is you saved me, and you continue to save me every day. And then Dick says, well, Bruce, now I can't hit you. I'll just have to wait and do it later. And Bruce says, well, you can try. So they're back on their normal footing. But that was a lovely little moment. It's just a couple of panels in the comic book between the two of them. And so I want to talk about the family in general. But before we dive into Bruce and his family of the heart, let's talk about his surrogate father. Let's talk about Alfred. What do you think Alfred gave to Bruce's character? And do you agree or disagree that with his being dead? Kyoko, will you start?
I will never support a dead Alfred. I don't care what story. I don't care what work of fiction. I will never accept a dead Alfred like I'll never accept a dead Bruce, and I'll never accept a dead Captain America. That is just not what I'm going to do with my life. So the idea of having him be gone is sacrilege to me personally, because all of that. So there's a line in Mask of the Phantasm when he's talking about it's not Bruce's fault that Andrea was too far gone. And the way that Bruce walks the edge of the abyss every night, and Andrea fell in, but Bruce did not. And that's what Alfred is there to remind him, is that I know that you're dealing with a trauma that no one should ever have to deal with, but you have support, you have someone that cares about you, and you have someone who reminds you that, yep, you're walking that tightrope, but I'm right behind you, and I'm going to make sure you don't fall. And that's what I'm here for. And I've always thought that's important in not only in just the nurturing way, but I love that Alfred is like 100% ride or die. Like Bane rolled up to Wayne Manor thinking he was going to do something, and Alfred was there with a shotgun like, all right, well, let's go. That's not how this is going to go down. This is Alfred J. Pennyworth, and you are not going to get in his house, and you are not going to get to my son. And I think that is always what he's been able to do, is have this really great, and also roast his son all the time, because it's Bruce. Come on. It's very easy to roast that man. But bringing that levity, that light, that family angle is really important to not only him, but Alfred in return, because Alfred lost his parents too. Alfred knew his parents longer than Bruce did. That loss is still on him too. So they definitely bonded over that type of trauma of losing his parents. It was just as devastating to Alfred as it was to Bruce. So I think that I personally think he always needs to be in the story. I really don't. The only exception is Batman Beyond, because Batman Beyond was excellent. It had no right to be that good, but it was really good. But I think that they were smart in having Terry be there, and Terry is the heart in that relationship as well. So we miss Alfred, but at least we were able to have another character that was still bringing that wit and light into Bruce's life as well. So that's me and how I feel about Alfred.
Yamil?
Yeah, I agree. Like he's a great support character. He's often like brings in some humor. Yeah, I don't have much on him.
Okay. Charles?
Well, I've always thought that Alfred as surrogate father does not work. In the original comics, I know I'm keep going back to the really old days, but Alfred didn't meet Batman or didn't meet Bruce until Batman and Robin were already established. And the thing that I liked Michael Caine as Alfred, and I really thought his speech about him being, I'm sort of protecting you, and I'm your father figure. But in a certain sense, it doesn't work because Alfred's an employee, and he calls him Master Bruce. And if he was Bruce Wayne's father, then he did a terrible job. Get this kid some counseling or something. And I understand why they're doing it, where everybody has to be an action star now. All the supporting characters have to be heroic. So now Mary Jane is wearing a Spider-Woman costume, and Alfred can't be just that older man who had once been an actor who turned up. I think this is what we're talking about here is when we say, how do you like Alfred or Dick Grayson? There are multiple versions of these characters. And so what they're doing now, if you had told me a couple of years ago that there would be an Alfred TV show where Alfred is sort of James Bond, okay, I watched it for a while. It wasn't great, but I watched it. But I don't think Alfred is a successful father figure for Batman most of the time. Sometimes it can work, but a lot of times I don't think it does. But that's me.
Okay. John?
Alfred has evolved from a servant to a partner, and now apparently he did raise Bruce during a critical time in his life, and then when Bruce left, he kept the home fires burning, and I think Bruce sees Alfred as more than a servant, and regards him as a parental figure. But as far as, and this is not the first time Alfred has been dead. He was killed a long time ago, saving Batman and Robin, apparently killed, and came back as a somewhat of a villain character called the Outsider. And later he was restored, and I keep waiting for DC to bring Alfred. They keep teasing it in the most recent comic series, Robin, which focused on Damian. He wound up with some elixir of life that he had considered pouring onto Alfred's grave. In Batman versus Robin, Alfred just shows up with no memory of what happened up until Bane snapped at Alfred's neck. And then in a recent Batman series where Batman is transported to another Earth, to another Gotham, where he basically decides it may not be my Gotham, but it's Gotham, and I'm going to help straighten it out. He meets that world's Alfred, whose Bruce Wayne has died. So I'm thinking, we've got a Bruce Wayne without Alfred. We've got an Alfred without Bruce Wayne. When Batman goes back to Earth Prime, he's taking Alfred. And no, he did make the offer, but Alfred says, "No, sir, I can do more good here." So they keep teasing a return of Alfred. And are we approaching either a 50 issue or an 800 issue, or some kind of anniversary issue where somebody can bring out?
Okay,
but
Steve.
No, I'm with Kyoko. I cannot accept a dead Alfred, and I'm waiting for them to bring him back.
Sorry about that, Stephen.
So when I think about, well, first of all, they do have a Lazarus pit. So as long as that exists, I mean, anybody can come back. That's not, I'm not looking at that as a permanent thing per se. But when I think about Alfred, one thing that occurs to me, because like, okay, you're now in charge of your best friend's son. And your best friend's son now wants to go learn martial arts, learn all this other stuff, come back, get dressed as a bat, and run around and fight crime. Why would you co-sign that? And when I try to answer that, the answer I come up with is I'm also upset because Thomas and Martha Wayne are dead. And so if this is how we as a group, as a family unit, if this is how we get retribution, okay, let's do this.
Which was basically part of the plot line in the Batman Year One trilogy, where Alfred was more of a soldier and a bodyguard, who simply passed himself off as Bruce Wayne's butler, and who actively worked with Bruce Wayne to become the Batman.
Fraser?
First off, I don't care that he's dead because he's not dead. DC cannot move me by any deaths in this century because they're all going to be reversed sooner or later.
Exactly.
More generally, Alfred started out as comic relief. He was the son of Thomas Wayne's butler, quit domestic service for the stage. On his father's deathbed, he promised to find Thomas Wayne's son and resume the family tradition of butlering. He was a complete bumbler, but he stumbled into their secret identities by chance and then wound up becoming Batman and Robin's right hand. Then he got a quieter, not a bumbler, but just a kind of straight-laced their person for many years. And then they killed him off, partly, this is what the editor said at the time, because there was the idea Batman and Robin are a gay couple or a gay fantasy had taken root, and they figure, take out Alfred, replace him with Aunt Harriet, put in the female element, that will diffuse it. Then these TV shows started using Alfred, so they brought Alfred back. And since then, they've developed the character a lot more. Year One made him the surrogate caregiver / father. As I forget who it was who said it, but I agree, it doesn't entirely make sense, but the trusted family retainer who loves the family, it's not just a job, it's his life, is an old cliche, and they just fell into it. So I don't hold it against them. And yeah, the snarkier Alfred of more recent years is one of the better things that has come along.
Yeah. I think Alfred turned snarky in The Dark Knight Returns. That was the first time he was really, planning to drink the entire cellar, sir. You should save some for future generations, assuming there are any.
I was going to say, I've always had a soft spot for Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. just because he was such a good balance between like the strict fatherly, but also I'm going to sass you. I'm going to sass you at every available opportunity. And his lines were phenomenal. I just love that bit in Mask of Phantasm where he's like, oh, so you'll be seeing her afterward? He's like, you think you know everything about me, don't you, Alfred? Well, I diapered your bottom. I bloody well ought to, sir. Like, I never forgot that interaction. It was so father and son.
Okay, well, let's do a show of hands. How many people think the Batman series is better with Alfred?
Oh.
All right. We're coming up on time. This has been a great discussion. We might have to do another one to cover everything. But before we move on to another discussion question, let's do a lightning round. Actually, no, let's do another show of hands because I'm looking at the clock and I don't want to keep you all really late. How many people here think Bruce Wayne actually slaps his adopted children? Okay, that would be unanimous. Yeah, I mean, that's a periodic eruption on Twitter is Bruce will slap one of the kids and then there sets off this whole debate. So which version of Bruce Wayne is your favorite version? Read Darkness and Light and why? And I think, Yamil, it's your turn to start.
So choose between darkness or light, or all the
No,
different
I'm
versions?
sorry. Let me clarify. Which incarnation, which version is your favorite, and how do the darkness and light of that particular version weigh into your choice?
Has to be Batman animated series. Has to be my first one. And that one is pretty balanced. He'll have really dark moments, and then he'll have really lighthearted moments. So I feel that one would be my choice. I mean, and Kevin Conroy, it's iconic. It's the best iteration of Batman, in my opinion.
Okay. Charles?
I think when I close my eyes and I think, what is my Batman, whatever that is. And in terms of the comics, I'm not going to go to the TV for a minute, but my Batman would be the Jim Aparo Batman from the 70s and 80s. And when he was doing The Outsiders, and Batman could smile and he could tell a joke, and he wasn't a jerk, and it was just enough where he could. He was always kind of grim and dark with the creatures of the night and all that, but he could lighten up a little bit, and I miss that Batman. That kind of got swept away in the 80s. And in terms of the television, I would say I have become a huge fan of the Brave and the Bold cartoon series. It's wacky, it's fun, it's very Silver Age, and I think the older I get, the farther back I keep going into my Batman.
John?
Okay, I agree that as far as the best version of Batman is the Batman the Animated Series. It, like someone said, it balances the light and the dark of Batman. Maybe that's because since it was meant for children, they couldn't go too far into the dark. But still, when there was this nice bit of shadow and Batman just stepped out of it, scared the living hell out of whatever bad guy was. Yeah, that's Batman. My favorite comic is again the one in the late 70s and the early 80s. This is going to sound weird, but I really like the Batman in Kingdom. This is an older Batman who's held together by an exoskeleton, who has made Gotham is safe. He's a reasonably happy person. And there is one thing, I think it was in one of the incarnations of the Superman Batman comic, where the Kingdom Come Superman and Batman meet the current Superman and Batman. And Kingdom Come Batman says to current Batman, just relax. It will get easy. So, basically he's given himself advice on, try to relax a little. It will work out. So I always, he wasn't in a big role in Kingdom Come because that was more of a Superman book, but he was a very, very, very good Batman. And for reasons that are all wrong, I really like the current White Knight Batman.
Okay.
That's just a really, really strange version.
Okay. Stephen?
We've all picked the animated series, I feel. But for me, the reason I would go towards the animated series is because, it wasn't all dark, but it was definitely intense and it was varied. It was like there was a range of emotions that at any given episode, like I'm pulling out of my head right now the scene where Harvey Dent is disfigured in the animated series. Mm-hmm. And it was emotional. It was like one of the most emotional things I've ever seen in animation, because it was like it just, the way they drew it with the look on his face was just like, oh wow. and it was touching. It was just, just all the feels, as the kids would say. And as far as the comics go, Long Halloween for me, because first it was one of the first things I had ever found. He wasn't buried in plot armor, and it was a detective story, and it had that almost like gumshoe Humphrey Bogart thing kind of happening on one end, and then all this like crazy comic book superhero stuff on the other. It was a nice, it got me right there in terms of feeling entertained and meeting these characters at these different angles. So yeah, that's what I got.
The graphic novel and not the two-part
the graphic novel.
The 2-part movie was disappointing.
Yeah.
Care for it either.
Fraser?
For sticking to the comics, 1940s, now that I've read them in those massive Golden Age omnibuses, not deep for the most part, although sometimes they get that way, not particularly dark, except sometimes, but just really solid storytelling. Bill Finger, when he was still young and creative, even though he was never get credit until after he was dead. Lots of other talented people, and it's just a great period. Next to that, again, 70s, 80s, Irv Novick, Neil Adams, Jim Aparo, Steve Englehart, Jerry Conway, Len Wein, Denny O'Neil, really great creators working on it. And I will throw in one scene from Kingdom Come where Batman and Superman are arguing, and Batman's finally, "You forget, Superman, I am nothing like you." "Oh, yes, you are. Because behind that mask, you're Bruce Wayne. And Bruce Wayne doesn't want anyone else to die." And yes, that is part of Batman, and it's something people forget, or a lot of creators and a lot of fans forget, and it's important. And I love that scene.
There was a good scene, talk about the scene between Batman and Superman where they're in the Batcave, and Batman turns away from Superman for just a second. He turns around, and Superman is gone. And Batman says, "Oh, so that's what it feels like."
Yeah. Kyoko, what about you?
So I have a very deep bond with the animated series just because I was lucky enough to meet Kevin Conroy. I'm going to try not to cry. I've been crying since November, honestly, if his name comes up. But for me, it just, like they said, like everyone's mentioned, the balance was so good. But I'll even carry it a little further, is that I love all of the things that we were able to enjoy in that series. And they brought it through to the Justice League, which is another one where I think that, gosh, his interactions with the others are phenomenal. It was,
want me to what?
Yes. That's the single dumbest line I've ever heard. just so him. But it was really great because people tend to think that Bruce has no personality if they've only seen the dark side of him. They don't see, he's actually sarcastic. He's actually funny. He has a sense of humor. He has wants and desires just like everyone else, which is always what I love about his relationship with Selena Kyle, is that he's like, "I'm Batman, I'm above it all." Oh, wait. I super love this girl, like super hard. I mean, he's so soft for her. It's ridiculous. And I would say comics wise, probably if I had to pick, I really like Batman Hush. Now, it could be because it's a little nostalgic for me, because that was one of the first comics I got to buy with my own little allowance money as a kid.
Hey.
But I thought it was really neat just because I love his Rose Gallery, and Hush was a storyline in which they kind of gave almost everybody a little turn. And I thought it was really interesting, especially since, again, he's always pretending, no, I have no connections. I don't love anybody. And then this Selena is just having none of it. The whole story through is like, nope, you're not an empty shell. I know that you care about your kids. You care about me. You care about this city. So we're not going to pretend that that's who you are. And then if I had to pick a cinematic Batman, my personal one is Christian Bale. I thought that, and most people disagree with me, but I feel like we're never going to get closer to what I consider to be the heart of Batman in a live action portrayal. I don't think we're going to get closer than that. I think that he, for me, was the one that incorporated all of the different great things that I think the character has to offer. You know, especially since it was one of the first on-screen portrayals of the Brucey persona, which most people, not only the comic book people really knew about that. The public at large didn't know that he kind of acts like a dim-witted moron so that it, you know, sells the rest of the identity. And so it was kind of cool that they decided to incorporate that into the story as well. So that's mine.
Well, cool. I actually agree with everything you all have said. I love the animated series and the balance. The Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, when they started taking Batman a little darker in the 70s and 80s, but not grimdark, not humorless, not a black hole of sucking in everything good and putting out nothing, is just, that's too much for me. And we really did not, we're actually at an hour now, and we didn't get to how dark is too dark for you. So we might have to come back and discuss that another time. Is there anything that anybody wants to say really quickly before we close off? No? All righty. Well, then let's do the standard thing and go around and tell people where they can find information about your work. If you have a recent or upcoming project or an upcoming conference you want to plug, even if it's not Batman, this would be the time to do that. And so, Charles, will you start?
Well, I can be found at Bowling Green State University, and I'm on Twitter or whatever we're calling it now, at Dr. Pop Culture BGSU. And I'm just going to give two quick little plugs of upcoming conferences. At the end of September, BGSU is hosting the Spider-Man and Popular Culture Conference. It's free and open to the public. It's Saturday. It's the 29th and 30th of September. It's academics and scholars and fans and collectors are coming. And in September and October, the city of Cleveland, Ohio, is going to be having a multi-event conference, art museums, cultural institutions, looking at all aspects of Superman. So it's going to be Superman's Cleveland is the title. You can Google that, and lots of creators and academics and fans are going to be at that. So I look forward to hoping to see you at one of those events. And thanks again for having me.
John?
Hey, my books are available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. My two latest books are The Wages of Sin, that's spelled S-Y-N, about a man who sits in the back booth of the shadows and helps people who have nowhere else to turn. And coming out next week, I believe, is Detectives of the Abyss, Murder at Dracula's Castle, which stars Jane Watson, John Watson's daughter, Sherlock Holmes's goddaughter.
Oh. Stephen?
Well, so I, when I'm not discussing all things nerd, I am a horror writer, and my stuff can be found at www.laughingblackvampire.com. I do have an anthology coming out right now, SVP's Little Black Book of Terror, the proceeds of which will be going towards suicide prevention and awareness.
Fraser?
My newest book is 19 Infinity, a collection of fantasy short stories, historical fantasies taking place in the 1900s. It's available in paperback on Amazon. It will be available in ebook from multiple retailers starting the 14th. You can find that information about that and more and me on FraserSherman.com, F-R-A-S-E-R Sherman. Note the odd spelling. I also blog about comics at Atomic Junk Shop, including quite a bit about Silver Age Batman, the new look of the 60s, the impact of the TV show, and more.
Kyoko?
I am Kyoko M. You can find all of my work at shewhowritesmonsters.com. My newest book is Of Wings and Shadows that came out July 22nd and is available for only $1.99. I'm also a contributor to Marvel Comics Black Panther Tales of Wakanda, which you can get in any format, paperback, ebook, hardcover, and audiobook. And lastly, I want to plug Milton J. Davis has an upcoming anthology that I'll be featured in called Space Funk. It is going to be a bunch of science fiction stories and space stories that are written by Black authors. So I encourage you to look for that this fall.
Yamil?
I'm Yamil. I'm a writer and RPG designer. You can find out about me at joseyamil.com. The latest release will be for the Gong Farmer's Almanac for the DCC RPG system and Weird Frontiers. Come check it out.
Okay, thank you. You can find me here on ConTinual. My website is nancynorthcott.com. I refuse to call it, I'm just calling it Twitter. I'm still on there. I'm at Nancy Northcott on that, whatever it's going by this week. My latest release is the third book in my Boar King's Honor historical fantasy trilogy, The King's Champion. It's set in the summer of 1940 and opens with the Dunkirk evacuation, closes during the Blitz, and deals with English wizards trying to stop Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Britain. That'll do it for us tonight. Thank you to everyone on the panel for coming and joining in the discussion. Thank you to everyone who's watching, and thank you to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit heroesonline.com.